Io poi in chiusura presenterò il NAUG e l'ACLAB che hanno anche collaborato per la realizzazione di questo evento. La parola a Richard Stallman.
I have some possibly bad news. There will not be translation today because they can't do simultaneous translation and there's no time for consecutive translation. I did tell them this weeks ago, but oh well. So you'll just have to listen to me in English. And all I can do is express my regrets to those who would have needed translation. What is free software? Free software means software that respects the user's freedom. When software is not free, that means it is proprietary software, non-free software. Proprietary software keeps the users divided and helpless. Divide and conquer. They're divided because everyone is forbidden to share with anyone else. And they are helpless because nobody has the source code, so nobody can change the program or even independently check what it does. And thus, proprietary software puts its developer in a position of power over the users. That's why it is an injustice. But what specifically do we mean by respect the user's freedom? What freedom is that? We always have to be specific. It's never enough just to say we're in favor of freedom, because the crucial questions are always the specifics. What freedom should everyone have? Free software means that the user has 4 essential freedoms. These are the definition of free software. These 4 freedoms are also the human rights that I believe every user of software is entitled to, without exception. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish, for whatever purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it to do what you want. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help your neighbor. That's the freedom to make copies and distribute them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to help your community. That's the freedom to distribute or publish modified versions when you wish. With all 4 of these freedoms, the software is free software, which means it is distributed in an ethical system that respects the user's freedoms. If one of these freedoms is missing, then the program is non-free software, and it shouldn't be being distributed at all. Its development is not a contribution to society if people have to give up their freedom in order to use it. But why are these 4 freedoms the essential freedoms? Why define free software this way? Freedom 2 is essential on basic moral grounds, so that you can live an upright life as a member of a community. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help your neighbor, the freedom to distribute copies to others. If you use a program that does not give you freedom 2, then you are in danger of falling at any moment into a moral dilemma. Whenever your friend says, "That's a nice program, could I have a copy?" At that moment, you will have to choose between 2 evils. One evil is give your friend a copy and violate the license of the program. The other evil is deny your friend a copy and comply with the license of the program. Being in the situation, you ought to choose the lesser of the two evils. The lesser evil is to give your friend a copy and violate the license of the program. This evil is lesser because we can presume that your friend has treated you well, is a good person, and that you would want to help your friend. We can presume this because the other case, where that person is a nasty person who's not really your friend, that's simple. You say, why should I help you? That case is easy. So we have to look at the case which is difficult. The case which is difficult is where that person really is a friend and really is a nice person, and you normally want to cooperate. So you shouldn't do evil to that person. Instead, you should do wrong to the developer of the program because he deserves it. He has deliberately attacked the social solidarity of your community. So if you can't help doing some kind of wrong to someone, aim it at him. That makes it less bad. However, to be the lesser evil does not mean it is good. It's never a good thing to make an agreement and then violate it. Some agreements are inherently evil, like this one, and it's better to violate them than keep them. But it's never good. And an unauthorized copy of a proprietary program is not a good thing. The only thing that's worse is an authorized copy of the proprietary program, because it does the same moral harm to the community, and in addition, the perpetrator of the scheme profits from it, usually. So, although this is the lesser evil, it's not really what you should do. What you should really do is avoid being in the dilemma. And there are two ways to avoid it. One is, don't have any friends. That's the method that the proprietary software developers prefer. The other method is, don't use this proprietary program. If you don't have a copy, then you can't fall into the dilemma. That's the method I use. If someone offers me a program, provided or anything good and useful that people might like, then if I'm offering it under the condition of promising not to share it, any kind of generally useful technical information, I refuse. I say, if I can't share it with you, I won't take it. I will not get it for myself through betrayal of the rest of society. The most important resource of any society is not a physical resource. It's a psychosocial resource. It's the spirit of goodwill, the spirit of helping your neighbor. This resource makes the difference between a livable society and a dog-eat-dog jungle. If you have a portable tracking device, please switch it off. They have already tracked you here. They already know you're listening to me. So you don't need to keep telling them. You can switch it off. And if they want to listen to my speech, well, they're welcome to come. This is why I don't have a portable telephone. I believe it is the citizen's duty to refuse to carry a tracking device. I'm sure they're convenient, but some things are more important than convenience, and this is one of them. So, it's no coincidence that the world's major religions for thousands of years have explicitly promoted this spirit of goodwill, because anything that can raise the level of this spirit even a little bit makes life better for everyone. Whether those religions have had any effect, I don't know. In any case, what does it mean when powerful social institutions say that it's wrong to help your neighbor? What are they doing? They're poisoning this vital resource, something that no society can afford. No society has too much spirit of goodwill. We can't afford to throw it away. And what does it mean when they say that if you share with your neighbor, you're a pirate? What are they doing? They are trying to equate helping your neighbor with attacking ships. And nothing could be more wrong than that, because helping your neighbor is admirable, but attacking ships is very, very wrong. So they're not similar, and we should refuse to use their propaganda term, pirate. If someone else starts talking about piracy and asks me what I think about it, I say, I think it's very wrong to attack ships. I refuse to be drawn by other people into repeating the enemy's propaganda terms. And what does it mean when they impose harsh punishments like years in prison on people who share with their neighbors? How much fear will it take before your neighbors are too scared to help you? How much fear will it take before you are too scared to help them? If you don't want to live in a society permeated by this level of fear, you need to take action to put an end to the proprietary software developers' terror campaign. I call it a terror campaign for a specific reason. In 2 countries, the proprietary software developers have threatened the public with rape for having unauthorized copies of proprietary software. And I think that threatening people with rape constitutes a terror campaign. So that's the reason for freedom number 2, the freedom to help your neighbor, the freedom to make copies and distribute them to others when you wish. Freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, is necessary for a different reason. So you can control your own computer and your own activities that you do with your computer. It may be surprising, but there are proprietary programs that even restrict the running of an authorized copy. They restrict who's allowed to use it, or how many people are allowed to use it, or what job it can be used for. And this is obviously not having control of your own computing. So freedom 0 is essential, but it's not enough. Because freedom 0 is only the freedom to do or not do whatever the developer already decided. To really have control of your computing, you need freedom number 1, which is the freedom to study the source code of the program and then change it to do what you want. That way, you make the decision instead of the developer imposing his decision on you. However, well, if you don't have the source code, and thus you don't have freedom number one, then you can't even tell independently what the program is doing. And many non-free programs have malicious features. Features put in not to serve the user, but rather to spy on the user, restrict the user, or attack the user. For instance, spy features are quite common. One proprietary program that you might have heard of that spies on the user is called Windows XP. When the user of Windows, and I won't say you because you wouldn't use a program like this, when the user of Windows searches for a word in his files, Windows sends a message to Microsoft saying what word was searched for. And, that's one spy feature. And when Windows XP asks for an upgrade, it sends Microsoft a list of all the programs installed on the machine. That's another spy feature. Now, Microsoft did not tell us about these spy features. People had to find them. And it wasn't easy. For instance, the list of installed programs is sent in encrypted form, which means you can't easily tell what the information is. People had to do some clever research to figure out what information was being sent. Is there any chance of finding me some hot tea? A large amount, like half a liter, with milk but no lemon. Thank you. Regular Pepsi will also work. Regular Pepsi will also work. But spy features are not limited to Windows. Windows Media Player also spies on the user. It does total surveillance. It reports everything that the user looks at. But please don't think that spying is something that only Microsoft would do. Microsoft is just one among many proprietary software developers, and basically they're all doing the same evil thing, which is making proprietary software. And many of them take the power that this gives them and use it to mistreat people in other ways. For instance, RealPlayer also spies on the user in the same way. What was that sound I just heard? No, I'm just wondering, was that the sound of Windows? Oh, good. Good. Oh, I don't mind if you use your computer. That's okay. So, RealPlayer also reports everything that the user looks at. And so does the TiVo. It reports everything that the user watches. Total surveillance. Now, the TiVo is an interesting case because the TiVo contains a lot of free software. In fact, it contains a small GNU/Linux system. And many people in the free software community applauded the TiVo when it came out. They said, they're using our software, how nice of them. Which is sort of backwards, you see. It should be how nice for them. Everybody's welcome to use our software, but when they do, they are benefiting from us. That's not giving us something, that's receiving from us. we should make a distinction between the people who benefit from our work and between benefiting from our work and contributing to our work. And we should thank people when they contribute. We don't have to thank them when they get the benefits of our work. Then they should thank us. Meanwhile, the TiVo also contains non-free software, and it spies on the user. And this shows us that the goal should not be that products use free software, meaning use some free software. The goal has to be use no non-free software, reject non-free software completely. And that's the aim of the free software movement. We want to escape from non-free software, and we want to help the whole world escape from non-free software forever. So, malicious features don't stop with spying. Some malicious features are designed to restrict the user. There's the functionality of refusing to function, where the program says, I don't want to show you this file. I don't want to let you copy this file. I don't want to print this file for you because you're not good enough. This is also known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, where the program is designed to refuse to work for you. And then there are back doors. Now, there was a proprietary program called Interbase, which was liberated. And once it was free software, the users looked at the source code and they saw it had a back door. So they took it out. They fixed it. But when it was proprietary, the users couldn't tell. It presumably had the same back door, perhaps for years. But the users had no way to discover this. They were vulnerable. Another proprietary program with a back door that you might have heard of is called Windows XP. When Windows XP asks for an upgrade, Microsoft knows the user's identity. So Microsoft can deliver to the user an upgrade designed specifically for her, which means it can take total control of her computer and do whatever it wants. That's the back door we know about. Is there another? In India, I was told that they had arrested some programmers working on development of Windows XP and accused them of working also for Al-Qaeda, saying that they were trying to put in another back door that Microsoft was not supposed to be aware of. Apparently that attempt failed. Was there another attempt that succeeded? We have no way of checking. We can't tell. And Microsoft was also caught putting in a back door for the National Security Agency back in 1999. So you can't trust non-free software. This is not to say that all developers of non-free software put in malicious features. The point is you can't tell. Non-free software is trust me software. Just trust me. So even though there are some proprietary software developers that don't do this, you can't really tell who they are, so you can't ever trust them. Meanwhile, those non-free software developers that do sincerely try to develop the program to run so as to serve the user's wishes are still human, so they make mistakes. They write errors in their code. They can't help it. And the user is just as helpless against an accidental error, an unintentional error in the code, as he is against a deliberate malicious feature. If you use a program without freedom number one, you're a prisoner of your software. We, the developers of free software, are human too. We also make mistakes. There are errors in our programs also. All non-trivial programs have bugs. The difference is that we respect your freedom to fix the bugs in our code. We don't keep you a prisoner of our mistakes, let alone our malice, because we believe in respecting your freedom. You're free to change our code. For whatever reason you don't like what it does, you are free to change it. And free software is generally entirely free of malicious features. And the reason is, programmers think of putting in malicious features when they believe they can get away with it. The developer of a proprietary program already has power over the users. So he faces the temptation to put in a malicious feature knowing the users can't take it out. But we free software developers, even if you suppose that we were tempted in the same way, that even if we suppose that our consciences are not stronger than the other people's, we realize we can't get away with it. Because we know the users would find the malicious features and take them out. We don't have power, so we can't force our malicious features on you. And we know this, so we don't try. So, these are the reasons why Freedom 1 is essential. Freedom 1 is the freedom to personally study the source code and change it to do what you want. But Freedom 1 is not enough, because there are millions of people who use computers and don't know how to program. They can't personally exercise freedom number 1. But even for us programmers, freedom number 1 is not enough, because there's just too much software. In fact, there's too much free software. There's so much free software that nobody could possibly master all the software that she uses and make personally all the changes that she might want to make. That's beyond the capacity of one human being. So the only way we can fully take control of our software and make all the changes that we want is to do it working together, cooperating. And for this we need freedom 3, the freedom to publish or distribute modified versions when you wish, the freedom to help your community. With this freedom, we can work together. Suppose there are 1 million users of a certain free program, and they want a million users who want a certain change. There might be 10 million others who don't care, but 1 million people want the change. Well, by chance, we'd expect there'll be some thousands of them that know how to program. One of these days, a few of them will make the change using Freedom 1, and then they will publish their modified version, which is exercising Freedom 3. And then all those 1 million people can switch to that version and get the change they wanted. They don't know how to program, but they still indirectly get the benefit of Freedoms 1 and 3. So, every user can directly exercise Freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish, and Freedom 2, the freedom to make copies and distribute them when you wish. Only programmers can directly exercise Freedoms 1 and 3, because that involves programming. But once they do, everybody gets the benefit. So all 4 freedoms are essential to everyone directly or indirectly.
Facciamo un minuto di pausa.
So, I think I will start again because it's a long talk. So, what if there are just 1,000 people who want a certain change in a free program? And suppose none of them knows how to program. They can still get the benefit of the 4 freedoms. Here's how they do it. One of them posts an announcement saying, I wish someone would make this change. Is there anyone else who also wants it? And the other 1,000 people will write back saying, I want it. And then they can start an organization. The idea of the organization is that they all become members and they all pay dues. And the organization uses that money to pay someone to make the change. So for instance, suppose it's a fairly big change. The organization might charge €100. And then if 1,000 people join, it will have €100,000. Well, that's enough to pay 2 programmers to work for a year. So they could make a pretty big change. If it's a smaller change, they might just want €10 from each member. In order to spend the money, they have to choose programmers to hire. So they can talk to some programmers and say, when could you make this change and what would you charge? And then they can ask some other programmers, could you make this change and what would you charge? And then eventually they'll choose who to hire. And this illustrates that free software means there's a free market for support of all kinds. Support for proprietary software is usually a monopoly because only the developer has the source code, so only the developer can change anything. If the user wants a change and the developer doesn't do it, the user has to beg, please, oh developer, make this change for me. Sometimes the developer says, pay us and we'll listen to your problem. And if the user does that, the developer says, thank you. In 6 months there will be an upgrade. Buy the upgrade and you'll see if we fixed your problem. and you'll see what new problems we have in store for you. But with free software, anyone who has a copy can study the source code, master it, and begin offering support. So we have a free market for support. And therefore, those organizations that really value good support and are willing to pay for it, because you're always going to have to pay for good support unless the public really loves you, they can generally get better support through the free market for support for free software. That is, better support for their money, because they're not stuck with one monopoly for support. Now, this brings us to a paradox. Usually, when there's a choice between products to do a job, we say that there's no monopoly. But when there's a choice between proprietary software packages, yes, there is monopoly. There's more than one monopoly. If the poor user chooses this program, then he's stuck with this monopoly for support. But if the poor user chooses this program, he's stuck with this monopoly for support. So it's a choice between monopolies. There's no way to escape from monopoly, except free software. It's the only way to escape from monopoly. And this illustrates a broader principle. Freedom is something much bigger than the freedom than having a choice between a few fixed options. So, because freedom means having control of your own life. So when people try to analyze the meaning of freedom by equating it to the freedom of choice, they've already thrown away most of what freedom means. They're keeping just a little piece of it. So their analysis will tend to show that freedom is a pretty unimportant small thing, because they've thrown away most of it. Be on the lookout for that error. Having a choice between proprietary programs means being able to choose your master. Freedom is not having a master. So I've explained the reasons for the 4 essential freedoms, why each of these freedoms is essential. If a program gives you all 4 of these freedoms, then it's free software. That means it is being distributed to the public in a system that is ethical, that respects people's freedom and respects social solidarity. If one of these freedoms is missing, then the system of distribution of the program is antisocial, and it shouldn't be distributed that way. The development of a proprietary program is not a contribution to society, it's an attack. So I reached the conclusion in 1983 that I wanted to use software in freedom. And I had reached more or less these ideas. Not every aspect, of course, but the basic part of it. And so I wondered, how could I possibly do that? I wanted to have freedom, and I wanted to enable other people to have freedom. But there was no easy way to know. It wasn't clear how you could do that at all. Because in 1983, all the operating systems for modern computers were proprietary. And the computer won't do anything without an operating system. And that meant that if you wanted to get a computer and use it, the second step after buying the computer was to sign a license, a non-disclosure agreement, to get an executable copy of the operating system. So just to get the binaries, you had to promise not to share with anyone, and thus betray your whole community. And the source code was essentially unavailable to ordinary users. So it was impossible to use a computer in freedom in a community. What could I do about that? I was one man with no particular fame except in this narrow field of editor development. And I knew that most people didn't agree with this position. So I didn't think I had much chance of starting a mass movement that would convince governments to change their laws or convince companies to change their business practices. But there was another way I could proceed. Instead of convincing anybody to make the existing operating systems free, I could write another one. And that way, I wouldn't have to convince anybody in particular. I just had to write code. And that was my strong point. Operating system development was my field. So I realized I could solve, or at least possibly I could solve a social problem by doing technical work. At this point, I realized that here was a major social problem that I was aware of, but that most people had not recognized. I had the skills necessary to try to solve this problem, and probably nobody else would do it if I did not. Therefore, I had been elected by circumstances to do this job. It's as if you see someone drowning, and you know how to swim, and it's not Bush or Il Ducino. You know who Il Ducino is? His name is Berlusconi. Then you have a moral duty to save that person. Now, I don't know how to swim, but in this case, the job that had to be done was not swimming, it was writing lots of code. And that I could do. So I decided I would develop a free operating system or die trying, presumably of old age. Because at the time, the free software movement, which I was just launching, had no active enemies. Lots of people disagreed with us, but they didn't actively try to stop us. They just laughed and said, "You'll never make a complete free operating system, ha-ha." And I didn't know if they were right or wrong. Nobody knew at the time if we would ever have a complete free operating system. But I decided to try anyway. Because when you're fighting for freedom, you can't afford to wait until it's a sure thing. If you wait until it's a sure thing, you lose most of the opportunities. And you've got no hope at all. You have to try when you don't know if you're going to win. This decision to develop a free software operating system led to other decisions, technical design decisions. What kind of system should it be? Back in the 1980s, there were many different computer architectures. And every year or two, there was a new one. I realized it would take years to finish an operating system, and during that time, the computer architectures could change. Therefore, if I didn't want the system to be obsolete before it was finished, it had to be portable. But there was only one successful portable operating system that I knew of. It was Unix. It was not free software, so we couldn't use it ethically, but it did provide a model of how you could make an operating system portable. So I decided to follow the design of Unix, and that way have a better chance of making a portable system that would really work. Further, since Unix was popular, especially in academia, I decided to make this system upward compatible with Unix. That way, all the people who already used Unix could easily switch. However, that decision had an interesting consequence, because Unix consists of many hundreds of components that communicate through interfaces that were more or less documented. And the users use the same interfaces. So, in order to be compatible with Unix, that means keeping the same interfaces, which means replacing each component one by one. Therefore, all the initial design decisions had been made. We could just look for people to replace each component of Unix independently. Therefore, the only thing that we needed in order to start the project was a name. In the community of programmers who shared our software in the 1970s, where I learned that free software was a good way of life, we programmed mainly for joy. Some of us were students, and the rest mostly were employees, but that was all a side issue. The real reason for our programming was joy. And so we often gave our programs funny names or even mischievous names, because thinking of the users laughing at the name of the program is half the fun. And we had a specific tradition that when you are writing a program which is similar to or compatible with some existing program, you can give your program a name which is a recursive acronym that says that this program is not the other one. For instance, in 1975, as part of that community, I developed the first Emacs text editor. It's an extensible programmable text editor. You can reprogram the editor during the editing session. And people liked it so much that there were 30 imitations of Emacs, and many of them were called something Emacs. But the ones that were done by hackers usually were called, one was called Fine for Fine is not Emacs. And then there was Sign for Sign is not Emacs. And then there was Ina for Ina is not Emacs. And there was Mince for Mince is not complete Emacs. And version 2 of Ina was called Zwei, for Zwei was Ina initially. So you can have a lot of fun with recursive acronyms. So I looked for a recursive acronym for something is not Unix. But when I tried the usual 4-letter method, I saw that none of the combinations was a word, at least not in English. And if it doesn't have another meaning, it's not a joke. So what could I do? Well, I thought I could make a contraction. And then I'd get a 3-letter recursive acronym. So I tried every possible letter. Anu, Bnu, Knu, Dnu, Inu, Fnu, Gnu. But GNU is the funniest word in the English language. It's used for lots of wordplay. And the reason is because according to the dictionary, the G is silent and it's pronounced new. So anytime you were going to say new, you could write GNU and pronounce it GNU instead. And you've got a joke. many, many years ago, some people occasionally said, hey, what's GNU? And now there's a better answer. You can answer them, GNU is not Unix. And the best part is, it sounds like you are being evasive. It sounds like you are refusing to tell the person what it is and you're only telling him what it's not. But in fact, you're giving the exact correct answer. It only sounds like you're being evasive. So, and there was even a funny song based on the word GNU when I was a child. So, given a specific, meaningful reason to call a particular thing GNU, I couldn't resist. And this illustrates the hacker spirit. What does it mean to be a hacker? It means to enjoy playful cleverness. And this is not just with computers, it's in any area of life. You could be playfully clever. If you enjoy that and you like to do that, then you're a hacker. And whenever you do that, it's hacking. So this name was an example of a typical part of the hacker spirit, which we call ha-ha only serious. Which is, here I was starting the most important thing I would ever do in my life. I knew that if it succeeded, it would be the most important thing I'd ever do in my life. But that didn't mean we can't make jokes. So I gave it a name, which is a joke. However, when it's the name of our operating system, please do not follow the dictionary. If you pronounce it new, you will get people very confused. You see, we've been working on it for 22 years now, so it's not new anymore. But it still is, and always will be, GNU, regardless of the people who pronounce it erroneously, Linux. So how did that confusion get started? How did it happen that there are tens of millions of people using the GNU system and they think they're using Linux? Well, during the 1980s, our task was to develop all these pieces we needed for a Unix-like operating system. Lots of components were needed. I say we because from the very beginning, it was my intention to recruit other people to join in. The goal was not to have an operating system written entirely by me. The goal was to have a free operating system as soon as possible. And everything I planned was to help us get there as soon as possible. So I recruited other people. Do you want to write some piece of the system? So various people started writing various components. And for the big components, the ones that seemed like they would be hard, I tried to find shortcuts. So I tried to see if somebody else had written a program that we could manage to use, perhaps changing it. Maybe the existing free program would be just a starting point or just part of it, but still that helps. That helps you get it done sooner. So I did that with all of the major components. And sometimes I found something and sometimes I didn't. By 1990, we had all of the essential components and many others except one. One of the major essential components, the kernel, was still missing. And in 1990, I found a starting point. I found a program called Mach, which people refer to as a microkernel, meaning it does, if you look at the kernel's job, Mach does the bottom half. And the idea is on top of that, you write specific programs to provide the specific kernel services that you want. And they run in user space, which means it's easier to debug them. So I thought, well, half the job has been done for us. We just have to write the other half in user space. So this way we'll get our kernel done really soon. And this architecture of a microkernel plus multiple servers is also what people thought at the time was the advanced, best way to write a kernel. It turns out that that design has some problems. And it took many years to get our kernel to run at all. And it still doesn't run well enough that we could recommend it to you to use. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait for that. Because in 1991, a college student in Finland developed his own kernel. He used the old-fashioned monolithic design, and he got it to barely work in less than a year. This kernel, which he called Linux, initially was not free software. In 1992, he liberated it by changing the license. He adopted the GNU General Public License, which is the license that I had written for use in the components of GNU. Now, the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL for short, is not the only free software license. There are many other free software licenses. But it's the most popular one. It's used for about 70% of all free software projects. And it's special in that it is a copyleft license. You see, all free software licenses give you the 4 freedoms. That's what makes it a free software license. If it gives you the 4 freedoms, then it's a free software license. But in regard to freedom number 3, there's a choice. It has to permit you to distribute modified versions. The question is, can you make those modified versions proprietary? Some licenses permit that. Copyleft is the requirement that says when you distribute a modified version, it must have the same license. In other words, the modified versions must be free as well. So copyleft is a way of utilizing copyright law, but instead of using it to subjugate people, we use it to protect everyone's freedom. So the idea is we make sure that when the program reaches you, you get the 4 freedoms. And the way we do that is we say the middleman is forbidden to remove the freedoms before the program reaches you. There are also free software licenses which are not copyleft, and they do permit proprietary modified versions. So those licenses they recognize everyone's freedom, but with copyleft we go even further and we actively defend everybody's freedom. In any case, when Linux had switched to a free software license, the result was that it was possible to use Linux to fill the last gap in the GNU system. And the result was a complete free operating system, which was basically GNU with Linux added. The development of Linux, the kernel, was an important contribution to the free software community, because that was the step that carried us across the finish line. Before that, we had lots of good free programs, and there were many who used them. But in order to use them, they had to install them on top of some other non-free operating system. After the last step had been taken, we had a complete free operating system, and it was possible to install that in a bare PC. And thus, the goal we had set out for 8 years before had been reached. It was possible for the first time to get a PC and use it in freedom as part of a community. So Linux itself was an important contribution to our community. But the confusion of thinking that this entire combination was Linux was a big blow to the free software movement, because it broke the connection from our software to our philosophy. Before that, there were many people who installed specific GNU components, and they knew they were installing GNU components. So when they saw the articles that described our philosophy, the same philosophy I've been telling you today, they would see them and say, ah, this is the philosophy behind those programs I like so much. So they would read it and pay attention. This doesn't mean that they all agreed with us, but at least we had a chance to convince them. And if they did agree with us, with our philosophy, then they would feel motivated to develop more free software. So the software spread the philosophy, and the philosophy helped extend the software. But once millions of people started using essentially a variant of the GNU system with Linux as the kernel, and thinking that the whole thing was Linux, then it didn't lead them to our philosophy anymore. Instead, it led them to look for moral guidance to the developer of Linux, because they were told, here you have the Linux system. And so they thought of themselves as Linux users, and they heard that he was the author of Linux. So they thought that the whole thing came from his vision. And what was the vision he told them? He said, I just did this to have fun. I don't want to think about politics. All software licenses are okay, and you have to obey them no matter what they say. And then he was developing proprietary software in his work, and he said so. And then he was using a non-free program to develop Linux publicly. And so he very visibly disagrees with the philosophy of the free software movement, and always has. Well, he has a right to his views. What I don't like is when people attribute our work that was based on our campaign for freedom to him and think that it's an advertisement for his views. And that's why I ask you, please call the system GNU plus Linux or GNU/Linux. Because when the people think they're Linux users and they see the articles about the philosophy of GNU, they say, that has nothing to do with me, I'm a Linux user. They tend to ignore us. Now, if you want to explain the philosophy of the free software movement to other people, that can be a very useful thing to do, especially once you learn to do a good job of it. But that takes time. And you may not want to spend all your time explaining this. But it only takes 1 second to say GNU/ in front of Linux. So if you were going to mention the system 20 times a day, it'll take you 20 seconds a day to say GNU/ each time. Now, it's true that this doesn't explain the philosophy to people. You can't explain the philosophy in 1 second or even in 20 seconds. But you can prepare other people so that when they see our explanation, they will pay more attention. And that's what you do when you call the system GNU/Linux. It's not just a matter of giving the GNU developers the credit that we deserve, although we do deserve it. It's more important than that. It's the easiest, most time-efficient way that you can spread awareness of these issues of freedom among the others who use or have heard of the system that we developed for the sake of freedom. The GNU system is the only operating system that was developed specifically for the sake of freedom and community. Other operating systems were developed for technical or commercial reasons. This is the one operating system developed for the sake of freedom. And people are in danger, and this fact is being forgotten even by its own users. You see, history tells us that freedom does not persist automatically. Freedom is always in danger of being lost. And if people want to continue to have freedom, they must be prepared to defend it. And defending freedom is often not easy. But in order to defend freedom, people have to value freedom. And in order to value freedom, people have to know what it is. In other areas of life, at least that part's taken care of. It's not easy to defend freedom of the press in Italy or the U.S. But at least people know what it is. A couple of months ago, we saw freedom of the press threatened around the world. First, some newspapers published cartoons making fun of Muhammad in a rather mild way, and we saw a bunch of fanatics try to punish whole countries for allowing that freedom of the press. And then we saw a Turkish movie which depicts the United States as an evil, conquering power that tortures people, which would be a nasty thing to say if it weren't the truth. And then we saw the entire country of Turkey being condemned for the fact that it had the freedom of speech necessary to make this movie. So freedom of speech was getting it from both sides. Teaching people to really respect freedom of speech, which means that anybody can be criticized, any view can be criticized, no view is so sacred that it can't be made fun of, is often hard. But at least people know the idea of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, because speech and the press have existed for a long time, and these ideas have been promoted for centuries. But computing is new. It's just 10 years, I think, since a lot of people in Italy began using computers. And the process of identifying the freedoms that go with the use of computers is just beginning. The free software movement says, here are 4 essential human rights that every user of software deserves to have. But most people, even most users of the GNU plus Linux system, have never heard this. So we haven't even got to the first level where people know what freedom is. How are we going to defend it? This is the area where our community needs the most work. You see, during the 90s, as the GNU plus Linux system became popular, many techies discovered that it was powerful and reliable. And of course, you could get it cheap because anybody with a copy could give you a copy. So they started telling other people, here's this powerful, reliable operating system, and it's very cheap to run. And it's cool. And they didn't say it respects your freedom to cooperate. They left that out. And when I pointed this out to people, they would often say, well, let's follow a 2-stage approach. First, let's convince people to use the system, and then we can teach them to appreciate the freedom. Well, maybe this approach would work if we really tried it. But when the people said that to me, it was always an excuse to work on stage 1 and ignore stage 2. And the result is we got this big community in which just a few of us had ever heard the idea of freedom. So the result is nowadays when somebody joins the community, he's probably surrounded by other people who never talk about freedom. They probably never hear the idea that non-free software is antisocial, that it's an evil, that it shouldn't happen, it shouldn't exist. The most basic idea, the reason why this whole thing exists, is forgotten by most of our community. So, if you think that two-stage approach is a good one, please join me in working on stage 2. We have all these people using the system. We have to teach them now to recognize why it's important. Because today, our community has something that we didn't have before. Enemies. Powerful, rich enemies. And the governments that serve them. Microsoft has announced its intention to try to impede our work. Other companies have not said this, but they're doing it anyway. For instance, the United States has 2 different laws that prohibit various kinds of free software, and it's considering others. One of these laws is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is not really a copyright law. It's really a technology control law. And what this law says is that if there are technical obstacles to accessing certain data or communicating with certain software, then anything that solves the problem is prohibited. In effect, it gives the publishers the power to write their own copyright regulations. They just implement those restrictions, whatever restrictions they want, as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, in some software. They say this is the only authorized software. And then whatever software we write to access the same data is illegal. Because you see, if it's free software, people can use it to get around the restrictions because people are free to change it. If you were in the United States, and I hope that you're not going to be in the United States, because as a foreigner in the United States you could be subject to arbitrary imprisonment even legally. One of the few rights you would nominally still have is that if you buy a DVD, you have the right to watch it. But the free software you could use to watch it on your free GNU/Linux system is illegal. It has been censored. The United States practices censorship of software. And I'm sad to say it's illegal in most of Europe as well, because the European Union adopted a directive which is fairly similar. The directive only says that commercial distribution is prohibited. But most countries, when they implemented the directive, they made it nastier than was required, and they prohibited this completely. However, that is something that you could conceivably change. You can organize for the legalization of the non-commercial distribution of DECSS and similar software. What should be illegal is DRM itself. The other law in the United States that prohibits various kinds of free software is patent law. You see, in the U.S., any kind of computational idea can be patented. A feature can be patented. An algorithm can be patented. A computational technique can be patented. Some aspect of the design of a data structure or a file format can be patented. Well, if you look at a large program, it combines thousands of such ideas. If 10% of the ideas are patented, that means the large program infringes hundreds of patents at once, meaning the developer and the users of the program are facing the risk of hundreds of different lawsuits. This is a crazy system because it subjects all software developers to a threat and all software users as well. But this is the kind of crazy thing that the U.S. does. And you know, when there's a problem in the United States doesn't try to fix it. Instead, it tries to impose the same problem on the rest of the world. And that's what it's doing. The United States government, along with the mega corporations it obeys, are trying to impose software patents elsewhere in the world, and that includes the European Union. Last July, one attempt was defeated in the European Parliament. They're already planning the next attempt. You are going to have to organize, you're going to have to contribute your time to the campaign against software patents. Take a look at the site ffii.org, which is the principal site of opposition to software patents in the European Union. Join in their campaign. Your help is needed. So today, with these powerful enemies, it's no longer just a matter of developing more software for people to use. Yes, we have to do that. But we also have to organize politically so that we are still permitted to develop more software for people to use. 20 years ago, the question was, were we capable of developing a broad spectrum of free software, of satisfying the public's needs? Today, we have answered that question. The remaining question is, will non-democratic governments allow us to continue serving the public? And we also face a threat from inside our computers. There is a conspiracy to redesign the computers of the future, to redesign them so that we can't really program them to do what we want. The thing that makes computers so useful is that they are general purpose computers. They are universal machines. They can be programmed to do any computation. That's exactly what this conspiracy aims to change. The idea is to arrange that there are jobs we can't program them to do, but they can't be programmed to do by us, so that they will not be real general purpose computers anymore. We call this treacherous computing. The perpetrators, the conspirators, call it trusted computing. And this is a difference of point of view. You see, they want to design the computers so that application developers can trust your computer to obey them and disobey you. From their point of view, it's trusted. From your point of view, it's treacherous. So by choosing the term, you choose whose side you're on. The companies in this conspiracy include Intel, AMD, IBM, Apple, HP, Microsoft, and I think the Hollywood as well. Now, treacherous computing would mean that DRM is not just illegal to escape from, it's impossible to escape from. And that's the goal of what they're doing. And by the way, when I say that these companies are involved in this conspiracy, this is not a conspiracy theory. I'm not guessing. They have a website. They say so. This is an admitted conspiracy. It should be illegal anyway. Companies should not be allowed to make conspiracies like this to control future technology. This should be a crime. This conspiracy should be broken up. Thus, the future of our community depends on what we value above all. There is nothing more important for us to do than teach other people to recognize the four freedoms and value them and defend them. If we gave everybody, if we could magically make free software to do every job and give it to people tomorrow they would have freedom. Would they still have freedom 5 years from now? Not necessarily, because if they don't appreciate their freedom, they'll let it slip. Someone will say, here's a nice program that does a certain job better. All you have to do to get this program is promise not to share with everyone else. And these people who don't appreciate freedom and don't recognize its importance, why would they say no? So 5 years from now, they might not have freedom anymore. 2 years ago, when people asked me, which distribution of GNU plus Linux do you recommend? There was none. There was no distribution I knew of I didn't know of any general purpose distribution that was entirely free software. You see, 10 years ago, it became normal for those who make the distributions to include some non-free software as well. And they always said to the public, as a bonus, we also give you this thing. Maybe it was Netscape or some other non-free program. And of course, when some distributors did this, the others were at a disadvantage because the public was saying to them, why don't you, the other distribution is better because it has Netscape. And so the other distributors started adding it too, and it reached a point where there was essentially no place I could send people. Now, I do know of a few entirely free distributions. The general purpose ones I know of include Ututo, Agnula, and Blag, and they're listed in the GNU Project's website, www.gnu.org. So, we're making some headway on that problem. But this shows you just how bad the bigger problem has become, the bigger problem that the people in our community don't even think about freedom. And if we don't start thinking about it more, we're going to lose it. I want to treat a few secondary themes. One secondary theme is free software and employment. If the world gets rid of proprietary software and switches to free software, how will this affect IT sector employment? Well, the first thing to realize is that there are unemployed programmers today, and there will probably be unemployed programmers in the future, probably even more of them. That's just life. No matter what happens, free software or proprietary, there will be unemployed programmers. But will there be more of them? Let's look at the IT sector. Programming is just a fraction of the IT sector. The people who can't get programming jobs can get other kinds of IT jobs. So in this fraction, a small fraction of that is proprietary software development, maybe 10%. The rest is development of special purpose custom software for a particular client to use. So, and that's not going to change. If the world insists on free software, the clients who want special purpose software will still have to pay someone to write it. So the jobs that might go away is this small fraction of the IT sector. In other words, it's no disaster. It doesn't really change the situation much. But we may not lose jobs at all. We might gain jobs. You see, free software also creates other jobs. Jobs adapting and extending free software. When a business thinks of using a proprietary program, it has two options. Take it or leave it. Use it or don't. With a free program, those two options are there, but so are many others. Make this small change, or this small change, or this small change, or this medium change, or this one, or this one, or this big change, or this big change. Almost an infinity of different changes they might want to make. And often they will make some changes. And this means paying programmers. So some jobs would disappear, and some jobs would appear. And whether this will result in a decrease or an increase, I don't know. What I can be sure of is it will not result in a disaster for IT sector employment. You don't have to worry. The second secondary topic is free software and education. Schools must use exclusively free software. There are 4 reasons for this. The most superficial reason is to save money. In every country, the school, no matter how rich it is, the schools are limited by their budget. So they should not be spending some of this limited money getting permission to use non-free software. However, some proprietary software companies get rid of this reason by donating gratis copies of their non-free software to the school. This is part of the reason why you should always use the Italian word libero. Don't say free software when you're speaking Italian. Say software libero. It'll be clearer because we're not talking about software gratuito. We're talking about software libero. Leaving so soon? I hope it wasn't something I said. And why do those companies do that? Is it because they are idealistic and want to help education? No. The reason is they want to turn these schools into instruments of imposing their power on all of society. When schools choose between proprietary software and free software, they direct society down one path or another. If the schools teach proprietary software, they are inculcating dependency into their students, a dependency that will last after they graduate. And you can be sure that the same companies that give these students gratis copies today will not give those same people gratis copies after they graduate, nor will it give gratis copies to their employers. So really, this is a way of using the school to apply leverage to society as a whole. Schools, however, have a social mission. They're supposed to train a society of capable people accustomed to freedom. And this means teaching the use of free software and only free software. Schools have a mission to train the next generation so that it will be accustomed to living in freedom. But there is a deeper reason. For the sake of programming education. You see, at the age of 14 or so, some people, the natural-born programmers, become fascinated with computers and want to learn everything about them. If a student is using a program, he wants to know how it works. But when he asks the teacher, if the program is, how does this program work? If the program is proprietary, the teacher has to say, I'm sorry, I don't know, and you can't know because it's a secret. And thus education is not possible. But if the program is free software, the teacher can say, here's what I know, and if you want to learn more, here's the source code. Read it, and you'll learn everything. And the student will read it because he's fascinated. And the teacher can say, if you find any part that you don't understand, show it to me. I'll figure it out and explain it to you. And this way the student learns a very important thing, how not to write code. Because these students don't have to learn to program. For them, it's obvious. You read a manual, you know what to do. But learning to write clear code that other people can understand, that takes time. The way you learn to write good, clear code is by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. And every time you read something which is hard to understand, you learn something. Don't write it that way. Thus, every school in Italy can offer people the opportunity to learn to perfect their programming skills just by having a PC running GNU/Linux and at least one teacher capable of guiding these students as they wish to learn. But there is an even deeper reason for moral education. You see, schools have a mission to teach children the habit of cooperation, the habit, and thus eventually the spirit of goodwill, of helping your neighbor. So every class has to have a rule. Children, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the other kids in the class. And if you won't share it, you can't bring it. However, the school has to set an example of its own rule. The school must bring only free software to class. Therefore, I suggest that you begin organizing to begin the long path of moving this university completely to free software. This can't get done in a day. It will take time, it will take multiple steps. But if you stand firm for recognition of the social mission of a university, which is to encourage the dissemination of knowledge, then right will always be on your side. So now I will close by introducing my other identity. You see, sometimes people have accused me saying that I had a holier-than-thou attitude. I don't think that's true. Because when I meet someone who is not doing everything possible to struggle for free software, I don't seek to criticize that person. What I want to do is convince that person to do more. However, I do have a holy attitude because I'm a saint. It's my job to be holy. I am Saint Ignucius of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as a text editor, but because it was extensible, it was extended to do everything. And it became a way of life for many users as they discovered they could do all their work without ever exiting from Emacs. And ultimately, with the creation of the news group alt.religion.emacs, it became a religion as well. Today in the Church of Emacs, we have a great schism between two rival versions of Emacs. And we also have saints. Fortunately, no gods. Instead of gods, we worship an editor. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must recite the Confession of the Faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux, it's not finished, and Linux is one of its kernels. The Church of Emacs has certain advantages compared with some other churches I won't name. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy. So if you've been searching for a church to be holy in, you might want to consider ours. However, it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever proprietary operating systems possess any of the computers under your control, and then install a wholly free operating system, and then only install free software on top of that. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint. And you too may eventually have a halo, if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. Sometimes people ask me whether it is a sin in the Church of Emacs to use the other text editor VI. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast, but using a free version of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. And sometimes people ask me whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is no computer disk, this is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous existence. So thank you.